The horticulture industry in Kenya is one of the largest contributors to the agriculture sector, which is also a great contributor to Kenya's GDP. But in the last 3 years, the sector has undergone major challenges because of supply chain disruptions occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. But now the players are coming together to try and see how they can chart the way forward for the sector. And of course, remember this year, it is also going through, we're going through a major drought as a nation, and this is likely to have a major impact on the returns from this industry. And the question is, how do we weave around this crisis and ensure that we remain a strong player, not only on the African continent, but at the global point as well? Good morning and thank you very much for joining us. This is the hour for critical conversation because on this show we're discussing the horticulture industry, and of course we're looking at the challenges, the opportunities and the way forward. Benjamin Tito is the Director in charge of Horticultural Crop Directorate at the Ministry of Agriculture. He will be joining us, or he has actually joined us so that he can give us an overview and of course help us understand where we are and where we are going next. Remember, this is where your voice matters, and of course we want to hear from you and engage with you as well. At O'Brien Kimani is my Twitter handle, at KBC Channel 1. We want to hear your views on this show. This is BizCheck, and of course, that I told you, next after the conversation around horticulture, we shall be looking at the trade union in Africa and of course here in Kenya. And of course, we know for sure that the job market in Kenya has been impacted negatively by the COVID-19, where more than 2 million people lost their jobs, and of course companies embarked on downsizing and of course right-sizing and of course this has somehow impacted the trade unions in the country. What is the way forward? My name is O'Brien Kimani. Welcome to BizCheck. And of course I told you that we have Benjamin Tito, who is the Director in charge of the Horticultural Crop Directorate at the Ministry of Agriculture. Thank you very much indeed, Tito, for joining us. But I want to hear from you, from where you sit, how would you describe the horticulture industry here in Kenya currently?
Thank you very much. My name is Benjamin Tito. I am the Director for Horticultural Crops Directorate, which is under the Agriculture and Food Authority, an organization which is under the Ministry of Agriculture, formed after the merger of government parastatals in the year 2014 through an Act of Parliament. So we are established by an Act of Parliament, the AFA Act of 2013. The horticulture sector has been the most resilient over the period of years, and this has been because of the contribution and the kind of networking that most of the stakeholders and the sector players have been able to do in terms of putting the right things forward so that we can be able to make a key contribution to the economy of the country. I want to take ourselves back and find that in the last 3 years, the gross domestic product in terms of contribution from the horticulture sector rose from 144 billion in the year 2019, and last year we hit a high of 157 billion. And that already shows a trajectory which all the sector players have been able to focus in terms of developing, and the creation of and opening of new markets has been the key contributor to this kind of growth.
Mm-hmm. You see, in 2020, of course, the industry suffered massively, and we all remember the images of flowers being destroyed in Netherlands, to be specific, Amsterdam, because there was actually no market because of isolations and restrictions around movement, and that's why we saw a drop in terms of earnings in 2020, in 2021. Currently, we are going through one of the worst droughts in 40 years. How do you expect the industry to look like?
It's a pathetic situation currently because of many of the growers, especially the smallholder farmers, practice both irrigated and rain-fed agriculture. Mm-hmm. And for that matter, because of a reduction in the amount of waters we have in the rivers, as well as a reduction in the pool of underground water sources in terms of supplies of water, then we are seeing already a strain of especially smallholder growers. The giants in the industry have invested a lot in terms of being able to get their own water, doing the irrigation systems for the water. But because we have close to 1 million smallholder farmers that are supplying just small quantities of fruits, flowers and vegetables to the market, then they cannot be underestimated, because their contribution is equally as important as those large players.
You know, there has always been this conversation around, you know, empowering the smallholder farmers, you know, to upskill and mechanize their farming. Has this borne any fruit yet?
It has, because when we look at the production systems and production practices that Kenya used to have maybe 10 years ago, there has been a lot of transformation. And this is coming from the massive investment that the smallholders have been able to put in place. You find especially those that are growing the short cycle crops. I'm talking of the French beans, the snow peas, the baby carrots, baby corn and the rest. The returns to their investment has been plowed back into investment in terms of getting ways in which you can be able either to get some water, and part of this is coming as a result of technologies that currently Kenya is using. Initially we used to dam water, but currently what we are having is the use of dime liners and modern irrigation systems like the drip, the misters and the rest, which are using very little amounts of water. Then this is the pointer to the way in which the water resource needs to be utilized, because you find irrigation systems that were done maybe 10 or 20 years ago were largely using furrow irrigation and the sprinkler irrigation, which really consumes a lot of water. But the transformation into the mist and the drip irrigation system then is already having a lot of saving in water. That means with the same volume water, the farmers can be able to do a relatively larger area.
Let's also discuss about what land subdivision has really done to this sector, and more so major producers like you know, Nakuru County, Kiambu County, Murang'a County. How has subdivision of land into small parcels of land affected horticulture?
It has negatively impacted on the levels of production for agriculture, and this is an area where probably we need to look at our ways in which we manage our land subdivision programs, because you'd find with the growing population and the older generation leaving their farms to the younger generation and the transformation of that into land use alternatives, not necessarily on agriculture, then you find there is an increase in urbanization. That means, for example, if you look at the expansions of Nairobi into Kiambu County, most of the areas where coffee used to grow are now having housing, urbanization. So urbanization has really contributed into this. But nevertheless, then we also need to look at alternatives in which we can be able to open newer area. And that's why I talked about being able now to use other alternatives in terms of production, because the technologies have also grown, and currently we have the use of hydroponic system, which does not necessarily need to rely on use of soil. But again, it's an expensive venture which really need to be looked at so that we can be able to see the balances that we can be able to have so that we can front agriculture to the next level. Most of the urban dwellers especially are now more keen and more aware in terms of issues that relate to food safety. And out of this, then you'll find there is a lot of transformation in agriculture, in urban agriculture farming, where at the backyard of the houses or even in the rooftops of the floods and the rest, we have some agriculture happening. It may be small, but it's still a contribution which cannot be left out when we talk about the collective and holistic role that food is playing.
You see, when we talk about horticulture, I mean, there are so many diverse, crops that falls under agriculture. I mean, horticulture. You're talking about things like flowers, vegetables, and fruits. And of late, the conversation has been around how to ramp up the production of avocados and the exports of the same. And I know new markets are emerging from China to UAE to Australia. Where are we? Because this is becoming a hot crop, and more so especially in the Mount Kenya region.
Yes, thank you for that question. Avocado is the new frontier in Kenya. We are currently #1 in Africa in terms of exports of avocado. In the last 2 years, we surpassed South Africa. And this is something that I want to applaud the Kenyan farmers for being resilient and doing what needs to be done to be able to compete with the giants in Africa and even in the world. Because currently, Kenya is placed position 6.
Globally?
Yes, globally. After Peru and the other giants in terms of exports of avocado. Nevertheless, now when we look closer home, the avocado growth in terms of production has really shifted from the main traditional zones, which were majorly rounded around the central highlands of the country. And we are seeing now opening up of new areas west of Rift Valley, in the Rift Valley, and even drier areas where traditionally avocado would be unthought of, areas of Ukambani and the rest. And these are now the new frontiers where avocado is moving into. Part of the reason is because we have large tractions of land where now we can be able to do a single planting of maybe around 4,000 trees, which now, if we look at it at the segmentation regions in central Kenya, you would find, because of the limited land holding, most of the farmers, especially the smallholder growers, would be having an average of 30 to 40 trees. But when you move out into the Rift Valley and in the west of Rift Valley and western parts of the country, including Nyanza, then you would find there are farms currently that hold even as high as 10,000 trees. And what this means then is a consolidated area where we can be able to have better management of the crop from one centralized location. And this is part of the contribution into why now Kenya is becoming a force to reckon with in terms of avocado exports. Allow me to talk a little about the China market, because initially in 2018, when Kenya started making negotiations with China as one of its key trading partners, we got a protocol that only allowed exports of frozen avocado
to China. And China is a big market. It's actually the biggest market in the world.
Yes, it is. With a population of 1.6 billion people, then it is a market that we really have to look at. But that protocol that only allowed exports of frozen avocado was a tall order for Kenya. Why? The cold chain infrastructure was difficult for the Kenyan exporters to be able to meet. And early this year, in January, when now we had a revision of the same protocol and allowed now exports of fresh avocado into the Chinese market. And that led into a culmination of some surveillance, some registration and audits, and 15 farms were licensed to export into the Chinese market. And what we saw with the first consignment that left Kenya early August, the first consignment was 45 metric tons
of avocados.
Yes. To the Kenyan eyes, it was a big consignment, looking at being the first fresh avocado consignment. But looking again at the population...
This is the one that was done by Kakuzi?
Yes, it was Kakuzi, then Vertical Agro. We had the two main companies that made the first shipment. But if you look at that consignment in terms of the population, vis-a-vis the population in China, it was just a drop in the ocean. So we had a Zoom call with China, and we are looking now at ways in which can be able to expand this market share, because with that small fraction, then it is just a drop in the ocean. And what we are likely to see is probably towards the end of the year, as we look at to review the closing of the season for avocado, then we are likely to start noticeably seeing an increase in the amounts of consignments of avocado that we are sending to China. And I would say it is the new market that Kenya needs to look at.
You see, if you walk around the streets of this country, you know, one piece of avocado, you know, will cost you between 40 and 50 shillings. You'll be shocked to find the same, you know, costing about between 400 and 500 shillings, you know, in UK. So how do we ensure that, you know, this crop becomes more profitable to the producers?
Thank you for that question. And just before I answer that question, I would want to take ourselves a few years back. Avocado in Kenya used to sell locally at 5 shillings. That has since shifted, and now it is becoming a gold in Kenya. In fact, now it is no longer a fruit for everyone. It has now surpassed mangoes and bananas in terms of value at the kitchens and the family homes in Kenya.
Yeah, because one banana, you know, costs you about 10 shillings or 15 shillings, depending on where you are.
Yes.
But the same for avocado, I mean, will go as much as 50 shillings.
Yes. And what has happened is this. When Kenya sought a wider scope of market, and we have been able to put now the necessary standards to be able to export to different markets, because different markets have different market requirements in terms of either the fruit quality, the size, the degree of ripeness, the dry matter content. Different markets have different requirements on the same. And what has happened is, because of opening up of newer, relatively newer markets, I'm talking here of Russia, I'm talking of South Africa, because we never used to export avocado to South Africa. Now we are exporting to South Africa. Remember, South Africa was #1 exporter of avocado in Africa. Now, part of the consignment that leaves Kenya goes to South Africa.
Why?
We are also supplying Egypt.
Why are we supplying avocados to South Africa, which is the second largest producer of avocados in Africa?
Because of the forces of demand and supply. Because
is it that our avocados are of higher quality than the South African, or what? Because I've never seen a South African avocado in the Kenyan market.
Yes, you've never seen, and we are not likely to see that in the coming years. And this is it. The dynamics and the powers of supply and demand is what is causing this. And why? Kenya lies along the equator. That means we have more hours of sunshine, and sunshine is part of the contributors to the organoleptic compounds, the eatability. So we have the Kenyan fruit having relatively developed higher dry matter content and the oil content, and that makes it a little bit relatively better to eat compared to fruits from other parts that are not lying along the equator. And what this means is, now using that technical advantage of our geographical positioning, then we can use it as a competitive edge and try to move our volumes to the market more. You also remember that we used to have some years ago, we used to have a trend where most of the exporters would be exporting immature fruits, and this has since ceased because of the interventions that we've been able to do in the field, and trying to educate and sensitize the growers on the need to attain the minimum dry matter content. Because if you harvest the fruit earlier than maybe a 21% dry matter, what is likely to happen is instead of the fruit ripening, it does shrivel, it rots. And that means now the eating quality of the fruit is compromised, and nobody would be interested in that. Looking at it further, then we have also developed more of value addition from this avocado, and we are seeing now an establishment of avocado extraction of oil, which is taking shape in the country. And other than this oil, the seed that used to be just thrown is now being crushed into organic fertilizer.
Organic fertilizer. Very good. I mean, Tito is just enjoying his glass of water here as we are having, some interesting conversations here around the horticulture industry, and we are focusing on the various crops. We've started with the avocado, which is the new kid on the horticulture block, and of course now we want to move on to other products. But before we move on to other products, let me hear this from you. I mean, how much avocados are we producing as a country?
It's a difficult question to give a very clear, definite answer on how much we are producing. Part of the reason is there's a lot of new plantings that is happening, and we've not been able to do an adequate crop census to establish even, number one, the tree population we have in the country, and the age of the trees, because a seedling will take on average between 2.5 to 3 years to get the first crop. Nevertheless, would be able to give statistics in terms of not just the production, but in terms of what we are exporting. Because currently, and because this is now the main season, on average, you would have 3 consignments leaving the country in every single week, and we are talking of volumes that could be about 3 40-feet containers, and that would mean that one 40-feet container has 22,060 boxes of 4 kilograms each. So we can be able to calculate the weight that would be contained, and the smaller 20-feet container holds 5,760 4-kilo boxes in terms of boxes. And that is now what we are pushing out of the country. Every single week we are having the ship docks in the port of Mombasa, and within 1 week then we are able to get between 20 and 30 40-feet containers leaving the country.
How much are we making out of our avocado export?
An interesting question, and I would say statistically, since the beginning of the year up to now, Kenya, we've been able to export value of 7.6 billion worth of avocado, and this is coming from 54 million kilos that we've been able to export. 54 million kilos.
What is our potential?
The potential is enormous, and what I mean is, with the current crop that we've planted in the last 3 years, 3 years to come, Kenya will have the capacity to be able to export, on average, not less than 150 metric tons of avocado in our whole cycle.
3 times more than we are exporting now.
3 times more. And this is also likely to change, because one of the reasons that I am making this contribution to this part is avocado had been localized within a very small niche, and that was, as I had said earlier, the central parts of the country. But if you go to Kwale County today, there is avocado growing. Kilifi County, and those are areas where we would never assume avocado would grow. And one of the key contributions to this has been the adequate supplies of clean planting materials, because again, we will never be expecting any production if we don't invest in quality seed. And that has been the thing. We are also thinking of ways in which you can be able to import clones from either Israel or even Peru, Mexico, and the rest. so that we can be able even to enhance our germplasm, because this is really going to increase the quality of fruit that we produce as a country. And this is also going to ensure that we have a wider niche of market. Then even as we talk about this, because the idea behind growing avocado is to be able to get an income out of it, we normally have the old traditional variety, which is jumbo. Jumbo is the local variety. But 3-4 years ago, we were able to get a market for the jumbo variety in exports. It is the avocado that used to be in every Kenyan table. But what is happening now is, with that niche in terms of getting a market for jumbo variety, and it's becoming a very important fruit, especially in the Middle East. We are talking about Dubai and other countries that are around the Middle East.
Saudi Arabia as well?
Yes. So that means nearly all the fruits that we are producing now are going into export. But that does not mean then the Kenyan population is also not getting a share of the fruit, because of what we've just described. The prices of avocado in the local market have gone up. And what this means then is the farmer, the smallholder farmer, is getting a relatively bigger share of the price of the avocado. Because initially in the market it used to be 5 shillings. That would mean probably the farm gate price would have been either 2 shillings or even 3 shillings. But now, when the price has moved to around 20 shillings per piece, we are very comfortable to say that the farmers could be earning a bare minimum of 10 shillings as farm gate prices for their...
But of course, you know, with the growth of this sector, I mean, we have also seen the reemergence of brokers and cartels in this industry who are reaping off farmers. And of course, in some cases, and more so in Kiambu and Murang'a counties, there has been rising cases of, you know, criminals invading farms and stealing the avocados. How are you dealing with these?
It is a quite difficult situation to handle, because what normally happens is, during the main growing season, and especially towards the tail end of the season, when now the numbers of fruits that are bearing fruit is going down, because of the competition, because of the normal forces of demand and supply. When the supply is high, the prices are low, and vice versa. So what normally happens is, there is that kind of temptation by some people to smuggle, I would say, to steal the fruits from the farms. And we have seen this in the media, where some youthful guys invade the farms and steal the fruits. But what we've been able to do is to do a sensitization to the farmers themselves, and in collaboration with the county governments, because this was really happening in Murang'a. In collaboration with the county governments, then we've been able to do sensitization to the county government, so that they are aware of the detrimental effects of harvesting immature fruit, because that was one of the main contributors of immature fruit. Because a fruit that is harvested at night, definitely you would not really be able to know whether it meets the requirements for export. But because you are doing it at night, you pick them and they are transported in the middle of the night, and by morning they are in the pack houses, either in Nairobi or wherever they are, then that has been a big problem. But after we've done this sensitization, then this has really gone down. I will not say, because I've not received any complaint in the last couple of months, but it is something that we need to look at it holistically and engage the stakeholders, so that they have a clear understanding what the impacts would be if we go back to start exporting fruits that are immature, because that would really mean our position in terms of export will go down. We lose value for money, because an immature fruit will not be as lucrative as a mature fruit. And what is likely to happen is, when we get blacklisted, then nobody would be interested in our fruits, even when they look good, because of that notion that these fruits from Kenya may not really be the right quality.
And now that you're bringing in the issue of being blacklisted in some of the markets, and I know that the question of sanitary as well as phytosanitary, is really now becoming a big challenge because just the other day we saw, some consignment to Netherlands being denied entry because of high chemical residues. What are we doing as a country to ensure that we do not mess up with the opportunities that are there?
This got us as a shocker. It was the first of its kind in Kenya. We've never had any interception that is related to the maximum residue limits of pesticides. This has been happening in the fruit sector, not in the fruit sector, but in the vegetable sector. Mm-hmm. In the vegetable sector, it's been happening. But it was the first of its kind in Kenya to get a notification that relates to exceedance of MRLs in avocado. And what we did after we got this report is that because of the traceability systems, we were able to identify which exporter had this consignment. And already as we speak, we've done an audit to the farms. I don't want to be able to release the results here because they are not yet out, because we are waiting now for the formal communication of
but you do want to give us the preliminary?
Yes, but the pointer is this. It did happen that during the management of pests and diseases, based on the preliminary report that we got in the farms, the time when these farms were being sprayed, the crops were being sprayed, there was a strong wind. So chances are high. I don't want to rule out that as the only possible reason, but chances were high that there could have been some drift of pesticide. And drift of pesticide means it is a pesticide that gets into the non-target area. If you are spraying maybe block A and there's wind drift, then there is a possibility that part of the pesticide may go into a block that was not intended for spraying. Because it is an established company, they were also not able to know how that happened, but we've been able to get a rejoinder on the same. And what is coming out of this is exporters, the growers, and all value chain actors need to be having a military precision on the way they do their things. Because that one single pointer of an exceedance in MRL on avocado could even have a negative effect on our markets, even markets where it was not detected. And we are looking now at China as the new market. Then what that means is, if we are not careful and we get maybe a second and a third or even a fourth notification, then Kenya could slowly be drifting and moving into the black list. So that would mean even if the quality of fruits, as I've described, is good, nobody would want to be fed with pesticides contained in a fruit that they eat. So this calls for a lot of stakeholder engagement, and I would wish we have to promote the component of the spray service providers, because these are professionals in the field of horticulture that have taken that as a business. And what they do is they'll be able to do the scouting in the farms without necessarily involving the farmers in terms of what needs to be done. And once they identify either a pest or a disease, then they can be able to take the corrective action on behalf of the farmer, because the farmers may not really know what to spray, because they are not learned to the level that they can be able to identify with precision what pest, what diseases is ailing the crop. So this would mean then we really need to work hand in hand with the Pesticides Product Control Board, so that we can be able to see the best kind of advice to advocate in the farms.
Help us understand this. I know, as you are saying, I mean, avocado, has been majorly grown in the counties around Mount Kenya region, but now you're seeing a situation whereby, even the counties in Western Kenya, like Kakamega, counties in Kisumu, I mean, in Nyanza, they're also embracing the production of these fruits, where do you see the biggest potential going forward of avocado production?
Thank you for that question. And just as I answer your question, we're looking over large tracts of land that are idle. And that is going to be the new frontier. As we speak, Uasin Gishu is really moving quite fast in terms of the new plantings.
Uasin Gishu County.
Uasin Gishu County is one of the... Uasin Gishu, there's Elgeyo Marakwet, there's Nandi County. Then as we move now towards Trans Nzoia, the Cherengani Hills, and towards all the way to Busia border, Mount Elgon, as far as Kapenguria, those are new areas where we have large tractions of land. And these are areas where if you go to the fields, you'll find there is probably a 2-year-old crop, or even a crop that is younger than 3 years that is growing.
Very good. I mean, I want you to hold on to your thoughts. We are back in studio. We are having a conversation around the horticulture industry. We've been concentrating on the avocado, which is now becoming one of the major fruits that is coming out of Kenya after, and we had it from the director of Crops Directorate in the Ministry of Agriculture, Benjamin Kipto. He has just said that, Kenya has become the biggest exporter of avocados in Africa after overtaking South Africa in the last 2 years. And the trend is going to go up. And so we just need to put our house in order to ensure that we are not added in the blacklist list, as it were. Now we want to focus on other issues. And this is now the issues of flowers. For the longest time, I mean, Kenya has been one of the largest producers of flowers on the African continent. But now it seems like flowers are now taking, the back pedal, and other fruits are now emerging like avocados and nuts. What is the state of flowers in the country?
Thank you for your question. The exports of flowers is still increasing, albeit the challenges of COVID, and we only saw this take a nosedive in the year 2020 when Corona really hit. Because I would say flowers are more of a luxurious consumption commodity. So when Corona hit, then the closure of the airspace then restricted the traveling. There were no partying because of social distancing and the rest, and all that had a negative impact in the flower sector. However, as we pick now the pieces post-COVID, or during now COVID, and when we've been able now to learn better ways of managing COVID, then there has always been an increase. But one of the key challenges that as a country we've been facing is the freight costs. Shipping a kilo of flowers from JKIA to maybe Amsterdam goes sometimes as high as $3. Then recently, in the last couple of months, there has been a lot of discussions, and for the first time this year, we had a consignment of flowers leave for the Netherlands, but by sea. And what really this means is, if we are able to focus on sea transport, because it is relatively cheaper, however it takes a little bit more time to get goods on destination, it only means that we need to change our production timings. Because if we are planting flowers to harvest and sell them in the market during the Mother's Day, Valentine, Christmas Day, and the rest, then that means we have to reschedule our planting in such a way that we allow a minimum of 24 days, 21 to 24 days, because that is the average tracking time, shipping time from the port of Mombasa to the destination, majorly which is in Europe. And this means then, if we are able to do that, we can be able to have some level of saving, and that can really increase the outputs of what we get in terms of flowers. On the same vein, there has also been an increase and acceptability of flowers even among the Kenyan population. Initially, flowers were only a preserve of probably those that are able to understand the value. But nowadays, that has really slowly changed, and I'm sure during the Valentine's and when we have those other holidays, even when you walk in the streets of Nairobi, you'll find a lot of exchange of flowers. And that means then the acceptability of flowers is now catching pace. This means then what we may not be able to export as first grade can now get a second market, an option in the Kenyan market. And this is something that we still need to do a lot of promotions on the flowers, because if we are able to produce flowers and we all don't consume them either way, then it would mean if we have something that happens like what we had in the year 2020 when Corona hit, then many of the enterprises may collapse.
And the fact of the matter is, I mean, look, Kenya, largely exports about 95% of its flowers, to the European Unions and other emerging markets. Actually, we export our flowers to about 60 countries in the world. Yes. And but of late, we have seen a culture where Kenyans are now embracing flowers more, and so that's why when you go to weddings, you see a lot of flowers. When you attend burials, there are flowers, and so this culture is becoming more commonplace. But in the last 4 years, the government has cut down on expenditure around flowers. And in any country, the government is the biggest, spender. Has this impacted, earnings from the flower industry?
Not really much of a change in terms of the earnings, but the only thing that has happened is with a reduction in the supply of flowers, then this has affected the industry, the local industry here. But however, we also need to appreciate there is another form of appreciating flowers other than the dead flowers. When I'm saying the dead flowers, I mean the cut flowers. Flowers that will be cut, then shipped into a destination. But you move into any part of Nairobi today, there is a lot of greenery, a lot of scenic views, and all this is coming from flowers. And that is now a new trend because of the landscape design and management. And if you look at now the Nairobi Expressway, there's a lot of flowers that are there. And it's something that we also need to begin appreciating and noting that not necessarily should flowers be served dead. Dead, I mean cut flowers, because even the living form of flowers, and if I've driven through the Nairobi Expressway, we have some roses that are in some parts of the expressway, and that we have geraniums, we have roses, we have hibiscus, and these are flowers that naturally were not being valued because of the nature in which they are. But today, then it is becoming a key thing. And we also look at the transformation of the sector and the use of the plastic flowers, because it's also coming in. Nevertheless, we don't want this to rule, but it is still a way in which we can be able to say Kenyans are beginning to appreciate flowers more. The only thing that we need to look at is the way now these flowers are presented in a way that will be able to influence their acceptability, and that is now the next move in which we can be able to do a lot of promotions in terms of domestic consumption of the flowers. And that's why we are seeing most of the weddings, most of the funerals are embracing. Initially, the only flower that used to be in funerals, especially in the rural areas, was the bougainvillea. But today we have roses, we have staties, we have carnations.
You have lilies.
Yes, lilies, birds of paradise. And all these mean that there is a wider acceptability. Nevertheless, to grow this market in terms of expansion, Kenya needs to look at, because the biggest trading partner is in the Netherlands, where we export close to 95% of all the flowers. But that flower, if we can be able to track it, you'll find 4 days later, it is in a shelf in the US, in Australia, in Japan. So Kenya can also be able to look at other markets and trade with them directly, not necessarily using Aalsmeer, which is the largest flower auction in the world. There are ways in which it can be, but part of the challenge would be if we have to ship flowers to the US, we need to have a direct flight because of the perishability nature.
And I like the fact that you're bringing in the issue of traceability. And this has always been a big argument. I mean, look, we have the coffee auction in Kenya because Kenya is a major producer of coffee. We have a tea auction here in Kenya as well because we also are a major producer of tea. How comes we take our flowers to the Netherlands, to the Dutch auction, to be sold to the rest of the market, of the rest of the world? Why don't we have a flower auction here in Nairobi? Why can't we have a Naivasha auction, for example, for flowers?
It's something that we can think of and conceptualize because, again, but looking at the investment in terms of the flower sector, close to 70% of the investors in the flower sector are Dutch. So the flowers are grown in Kenya, majorly in Nakuru County and Laikipia, Meru County, but all that flower is sold to their partners, kind of to their own businesses on the other part of the world. Nevertheless, it's a prudent idea which we can be able to embrace and see whether we could have a way in which we can be able to have a local flower auction beginning, and I'm sure with time we can be able to build it to a level where it becomes even as recognized as the Aalsmeer, where we have a lot of flowers that exchange in the across the globe.
Very good.
But what we need to look at, even as we conceptualize this, is the acceptability, because the Aalsmeer, which is the biggest flower auction in the world, and they receive flowers majorly from Kenya, there's Ethiopia and all the other suppliers, and that is where they conglomerate, and now from there they can be able to pack the flowers into different destinations, but traceability of the Kenyan origin flower is lost. And that's why if you're in America, even if the stem may be grown in Kenya, that is lost. However, we are looking now at a way in which, together with the Kenya Promotion and Branding Agency, in which that traceability of the Kenyan origin grown in Kenya is never lost, even when it is in a different market where we don't necessarily supply. So it is something, it's work in progress, so to speak. So ultimately, this is something that we are likely to see in the coming years.
Briefly, because I have to let you go, tell us about standards. What are you doing to enforce standards? Briefly.
Thank you. It's a nice question. There's so much that is happening in the world of standards. And standards basically is a way in which we can be able to do things in an harmonized way so that we create the differences that exist between one point to another. So in terms of the standardization and horticulture code of practice, together with stakeholders, we did develop the Kenya Standard 1758, which is developed by Kenya Bureau of Standards because they are the custodians and they are the body mandated to develop standards for the country. But Horticultural Crops Directorate is the implementer, is the one that runs with the standard. And this Kenya Standard 1758 heavily benchmarked on the global gap. And what this means is the Kenya Standard 1758, then it's not really a replacement, but it is trying to bring the standard in tandem with the Kenyan setting, so that what we produce in the country, if it gets that standardization mark, then it gives some level of confidence to the growers the consumers and all the value chain actors that what they have meets the quality. This KS 1758 comes in two parts. The Kenya Standard 1758, there's part one that purely handles flowers, and part two which takes care of the fruits and the vegetables. And that division has been brought because of the pesticide regime usage, because flowers are not directly consumed by eating. The vegetables and the fruits do so. So that means the pesticides that are used in the flower industry are different. We may be having the same molecules, but their formulations is different so that it allows biodegradation when it is sprayed on the vegetables and fruits.
Very good.
Nevertheless, I need to explain that we are already benchmarking and already doing trials with some local supermarkets here to see whether we can be able to implement the standard, because we already have now patented mark of quality, which is the KS 1758 as a standard. And this is going to happen that you'll be able to go to a supermarket and you find a shelf marked with that mark of quality, and that gives you a safety assurance that whatever is in that particular shelf is sustainably grown.
Very good. We have to come to the end of this conversation because our time is really well spent. But Benjamin, thank you very much indeed for finding time to be with us, and of course we'll keep on engaging with you on these issues.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Thank you.
Benjamin Tito is the director of Horticulture Crops Directorate at the AFA, or the Ministry of Agriculture, joining us this morning. We're taking a break, and then thereafter we are coming back with our second conversation. Stay right here.